Hello everyone, this is Brian Kelly from Association Mavens, where you get direct access to some of the foremost thinkers and teachers in the association industry. My guest today is Catherine Zaic. Catherine is the Vice President of Association Consulting and Project Management at Design Data and has worked in the association management arena for 25 years. She's an expert in association management best practices and strategic technology initiatives. Welcome to Association Mavens, Catherine.
Hi, Brian. Thank you for having me.
So I was eager to talk with you about a subject that's very near and dear to my heart, and that's AMS selection. So for associations that are looking to either implement a new solution for their association management software or are looking to replace something that they've got, whatever the case is, you're somebody that they usually go to for insight and advice and consultations. So what I wanted to start off with was having you talk a little bit about what's the biggest challenge that associations face when looking to select an association management system.
You know, I think probably the biggest challenge is, aside from just getting it right, is understanding how AMS systems have changed even in the last few years, and really getting your mind wrapped around the fact that your existing AMS system probably, in many cases, acts like a big Rolodex that you can build dues from. That's still the case for a lot of associations, and even if they have an association management system that does a lot of other things, they don't always use them to do those other things. And so what I find when we come in to do a consulting engagement with a client is that a lot of times they're not really understanding the fact that an AMS is an enterprise system. It should be running the core of your business at the very least and working with lots of other systems to pass information back and forth. And I think the hardest part is to make that jump from, you know, this is my membership system to this is my enterprise system. This is how I run my business.
So with, a lot of associations, as they kind of go through this process of trying to determine what's a solution that they need or what's going to meet their needs, oftentimes they're faced with, should we consider an AMS or, maybe we're looking at a CRM system. Can you talk a little bit about, the differences between those two types of systems and essentially what would be best suited for an association? Maybe it's a specific need, but would love to have you talk a little bit more about the differences between those two.
So a customer relationship management system, CRM, is essentially a subset, should be a subset of what an AMS system is, right? There's a core part of your AMS system that is actually a CRM, and a good AMS system will have a good CRM core. When people talk about CRM systems, they typically are referring to specific products such as Microsoft CRM or Salesforce.com, both of which are excellent CRM systems. The problem that you run into is those systems, they're not built for associations. And so you don't have first of all, the membership component is not there in those out-of-the-box systems. The other piece of that is they're not typically built out to do AR, accounts receivable, like your AMS system is. So there has to be, if you select one of those products to use as an AMS system, there's a significant amount of development that has to be done to get them to where they need to be to run your association. That is not to say that it can't be done, and that's not to say it hasn't been done. Both Microsoft CRM and Salesforce.com have development platforms that are open to partners who can build vertical, plugins for them, and those plugins have or are in the process of being developed for by companies that specialize in AMS software. So it's not impossible to find a good AMS product built on CRM, but it's also a little bit of a trade-off, because those products typically are not as well developed. They just haven't had time to be as AMS systems. So you have to kind of weigh that. We never like to recommend that people buy something that they have to mostly build themselves or hire somebody to build, because you don't get the benefit of lots of years and lots of depth of knowledge about, from working with hundreds of customers on how to do it right. And I think probably the biggest drawback for me really is the accounting piece. I don't think, that's not easy to build. It's taken AMS companies many, many years to get that part right. And it's something that is nothing to be sneezed at.
Great. So let's say I'm Association XYZ, and we've gotten to the point where we've had a system for maybe the last 7 or 8 years, and we're thinking that within at least the next year, maybe 2 years, we'd like to go a new direction. Can you talk a little bit about what would be the first steps at that point? When I'm at my association pondering this and thinking about this, how would I best go about looking to research the options that are out there, or, exactly like pulling together what our needs are for a new system? What are some of the things that you see or work with?
I think probably it all depends on there are a lot of variables, right? Part of it depends on how big you are, how complicated you are, how many things you do. It's partly a game of, part of it is figuring out your requirements, of course, and for that you really have to know your own business very well. It helps to have an independent party help you with that. It can be a consultant who specializes in that. I've found that some associations where they have somebody internally who is a good enough investigator and can go around from department to department and really gather requirements in a meaningful way, that can sometimes solve the problem. But you have to size it right. So there aren't thousands of AMS systems out there. There are probably dozens, and I think the issue there is you gotta the smaller you are, the less complicated you are, the more choices you have. The bigger you are, the more complicated you are, the fewer choices you have. A good thing to do is, just when you're just getting your feet wet, is go to the ASAE Tech Trade Show, for example, take a walk around the floor, have people do demos for you. Most good-sized AMS, reputable AMS companies are there and can kind of walk you through what their software does. I will say that, at least among the top tier of AMS companies, everybody's software does 90% of what everybody else's software does. And so it's a matter of what works best for you. And that's when you get into the real, what exactly are my requirements and how do I need to do things? It's a matter of what's the most comfortable user interface and all kinds of things that you have to touch it and feel it to get to the right answer.
Yeah, definitely. So the next thing I wanted to ask you was about the using a vendor selection consultant. We talked a little bit about that, but I want to get your thoughts on, what are the benefits to me as XYZ Association when I choose to work with somebody who's an expert in this area versus going about it myself or on our own as a team. And maybe are there any pitfalls that if we weren't working with an expert who knows all of the different options that are out there that we might run into?
Sure. It's sort of shameless self-promotion, but I will answer that question. The fact of the matter is that um, there are a number of us in the industry that do that, and we're all pretty darn good. But it comes from doing it a lot, talking to a lot of clients, and really understanding associations. And I can say that one of the benefits to the association is that it really gets them the benefit of what their peers are doing. You know, we've worked with hundreds of other associations similar to them, and we can really draw on that, and we do. I mean, and I'm not just talking about design data. I'm talking about all of us. We go back, we reach into our bag of tricks and say, you know, ABC Association does it this way. You're presenting me with a similar problem. How about we talk about this? And it is actually a big benefit to people. The other thing is using an outside third party helps you. There's no prejudice there, right? They're not doing things a certain way because they've always done it that way. They're asking you questions to kind of bring that out. And where are you doing things that you're doing for no good reason other than that you've always been doing it that way? So I think that's helpful. I think just the organizational feat of getting the right people in the right room and creating that synergy that allows them to kind of bounce ideas off each other is helpful, and I think it's hard to do that when you're only working with your own staff. So right. I think those are real benefits. I think on the back end, farther down the road, of course, we all have relationships with vendors, and we all, independent consultants, and there are many of us, we have to keep good relationships with everybody, and so we can't play favorites. We can't do any of that stuff because when you play favorites with vendor A, vendor B gets really mad at you, and you can't do that. So you have to be impartial per force, and you have to really know what they're up to. So that's always helpful. And you just need to be at the top of your game and know what's going on in the AMS world. So I think that's a benefit to you. I think the other thing that's a really huge benefit is and I don't think all consultants do this, but I know that we do, and I know that some others do. Contract negotiation with a vendor is a really important thing. We navigate these contracts all the time. We know what they look like. We're not attorneys, but what we do know how to do is kind of figure out, are you getting the most for your money? Where can you save money? Does this cost for this look right compared to what we've seen elsewhere, that kind of thing. And I think we end up getting a better deal for our clients than possibly a client could get for themselves. We know what to ask. We know kind of how far to go. And I think that's a real benefit. I think in many cases, the money you spend on the consultant, you actually save on the contract.
Mm.
It kind of pays for itself if you can kind of see past the initial cost to hire a third party. It actually will pay for itself in the end. Got it.
So it sounds like obviously there's some of the benefits of being able to work with a consultant in that role. Are there any challenges? Maybe some of the things that tend to be difficult through the process that I should be aware of as an association executive, or is it all going to be a great, wonderful experience?
No, well, yeah. I mean, I think association executives in general underestimate the amount of time and the amount of stress this whole process will cause.
Yeah.
I think we estimate. So what we do, and I think it's similar everywhere, we request that the client form a core team. So they take subject matter experts from every, department or functional area in their association, and they put together a team of people who not only report back to their own department, but are actually empowered to speak for their department and to make a certain level of decisions on behalf of their department. And that helps the process a lot. So those people on that core team, I think you can expect about maybe 15 to 20% of their time during a selection process. Now that's not every day, every week. Sometimes it's a little more. Or a week when you have 3 or 4 demos, that's the week. The week's gone. That's all they're doing.
Yeah.
But there are, if you figure that you've got interviews for, that they should be at least participating in their own sections for, that's a lot of hours there. You've got demos. You've got reviewing their portions of an RFP document and or a traceability matrix. It's tedious work. So there's a lot there. Once contract negotiation, everybody gets a couple of week hiatus except for the consultant and usually the CFO and the main point of contact in IT. And then when you start system discovery or design, they're right back at it, and they're asking the really detailed questions that you don't have to know up front. So it's a serious time commitment. The keys to it are you have to distribute the work, you have to understand who's doing what, you have to make sure that people have backup. You need to understand that part of their burden of other things has to be taken off their shoulders. What I found works really well with some of my clients is they actually offer incentives to be on the core team. They actually, it is part of your performance review for the duration of time that you're on the team, and it actually can produce some nice bonuses at the end of the process. So, those kinds of things work really well, I think, because people do have to put in an extraordinary amount of work and time to get it done right. And the consultant isn't doing everything. The consultant is guiding the process and helping you make the hard decisions. They're not making this decision for you.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's good that, it's certainly something that is an involved, time-consuming process, and knowing that up front and understanding that the distribution of work does make a big difference is something that seems like it's oftentimes overlooked, especially when you get halfway through this process and it starts to become a bit arduous. So okay, the next thing I really want to get into with you is talking about budget. So if, again, I'm in the process of looking at what should we choose, which direction should we go. Are there any tips or best practices that you can share related to how we should go about allocating dollars in our budget for a new system? Is it something that we should do after we look at some of the options? Is it something we should do, way in advance? How do we get a sense for what those dollar amounts should be?
Well, the reality of an association is that they have to have that budget established before they really can make a decision anyway. So, the fact is it has to go through the finance committee. It often has to go before the board. In many cases, these are not insignificant amounts of money, and so you need to be pretty close. What I tell people is once they've established what they think is going to be the budget with all the scientific tools at their disposal, they need to then add 25%, and that way, if they come in 25% under, they look like heroes, and chances are they're probably not going to go over. So it's always good to add a fudge factor to whatever you come up with. But there are a lot of variables there. in general, AMS systems are licensed by user. So if you have a lot of users, the cost is going to be higher. That being said, I know that the way a lot of associations try and lower their cost is not to count everybody as a user, which I find to be not a best practice. Because if you're going to use it as an enterprise system, then everybody has to be a user. Everybody has to be on the system. And so you kind of have to, you can negotiate the per user cost of a system. Some vendors have a casual user versus a power user license fee, and there are all kinds of ways you can get that number down, but you shouldn't skimp on that. And then the other variable is it a SaaS product, or is it a product that you license outright? If you license it outright, you're going to have a bump, in the first year, and possibly spilling over into the second year.
Yeah.
And then your cost is going to be even thereafter. One of the problems that we find when we're doing an apples-to-apples comparison amongst vendors is that if you have vendors that vendors that offer SaaS mixed with vendors that don't, you have to do at least a 5-year spread. I sometimes do a 7-year spread to make it all work, because that's what you have to look at. People have to begin to see the reality of this is, I just talked about how tedious and arduous a process it is to get an AMS system up and running and working. The fact of the matter is, you only want to do this once. You want to find yourself a vendor you love, and you want to nurture that relationship, and you want to stay with it. So you want to anticipate what your costs are going to be over time, and not focus so much on what that upfront bump is going to be. Because your services costs are always going to be front-loaded. That's where all the time goes in. But you really want to think of it as a longer-term investment. And in order to do that, you really need to spread those costs over time. That said, I think, when you're budgeting for this, probably the most practical way to get your budget set ahead of time, before you're actually at the point of making the decision and all of a sudden realize that you don't have enough money to do it, is to actually go out with a request for quote. It doesn't have to be elaborate. You can, just give general information about yourself, including the number of users, and, kind of in general, I have committees, I'm a trade association, I have members, I have X number of members, I have educational programs, or whatever the other things that you do are. Once you've established that baseline information, you can send that to 4 or 5 vendors, get pricing back, and you will be amazed at how close those prices are going to be.
Yeah.
But that'll at least give you a ballpark. And then if you add the 25% number, you can, you can kind of take it from there.
Gotcha.
So, it can be a lot of money. It's a major investment. It's a major part of your IT budget. And again, if you're thinking of it as this is the engine that I'm using to run my business, then it's worth it. The other thing that's a factor there, and I don't want to gloss over this, is I talked a little bit about software as a service, and that being sort of licensing over time. Mm-hmm. Or paying for licensing over time. But the other aspect of that is hosting. And a lot of AMS vendors who do not offer SaaS do offer hosting in real professional data centers. And I've come to the conclusion over the last few years that is a good idea for almost everybody, for every size association, because small ones, you don't want it on your premises. These data centers are much more secure and they have much better uptime than you could ever have. Mm. So that's important. Large associations, I find more and more, the bigger they are, the more they just want to farm it out and have somebody else deal with it because they've got an awful lot of other things that they're doing. So I think that's really another important piece of this, because that means that all of a sudden you don't have those on-premise costs of, I've got all these servers, I got to upgrade my servers every 3 years. The vendor takes care of all that. It regularizes your cost over time so that you're paying a structured monthly fee, and you can lock that in for a lot of years at a time. Surprisingly, vendors have been willing to lock those fees in for 4 and 5 years, which is a really good deal. And if you can do that, then you really know what your costs are going to be for the next 4 or 5 years. And as you're working through those 4 or 5 years, you can, and you like where your vendor is going and everything else, then you just negotiate the next 4 or 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really good model. I think its time has come, and I think I see more and more associations doing it. We don't see a lot of associations trying to put big AMS systems or even small AMS systems on their premises anymore.
Right. I mean, it seems like it's kind of the best hybrid solution where you get that software as a service model, but yet it's still in a hosted environment that's secure. You don't have to worry too much about it, but it also gives you a little bit more robust aspects to it than if it was a straight out of the box SaaS solution.
Absolutely. And I think, if you're talking about, and there are different size systems, there are little bitty systems that you don't want to customize. Actually, I'll step back on that. You really don't want to customize too much anyway.
Yeah.
But, there are systems where you really can't customize anything much. And for a lot of smaller associations, that's a great thing. The bigger you get, you're always, you can stick to baseline almost 100%, and then there's always a but. Oh, but we have to have this. And sometimes the requirements that associations come up with that are unusual are actually sort of the harbinger of what's coming, So I've got one client right now that has really pretty far out requirements for multiple currency. But they have offices all over the world with actual staff in them, and they sell products all over the world, and they don't sell them all out of the US. Some of them are sold out of Europe, and some of them are sold out of Asia. So, that makes sense for them. But the fact is, when you negotiate with the vendor and say, what, these are things that are not now in your system, or not exactly the way we need them to be in your system, but you're going to need these things. So that becomes then a bargaining chip of, well, okay, if you help us build them, we won't charge you so much for the customization, and then we'll put it in baseline. And that's a negotiation point, and it's a way to build better software. So everybody wins.
Well, I want to take a step back and have you talk a little bit about this notion of customization. You mentioned that that's maybe not the best thing, and can you talk to the reasons why you maybe not would recommend that particular approach to customizing a specific need?
Sure. So in the early good old days of AMS systems, everything was customized. You built it on a Wang, you built it on an IBM 36, and now I'm losing people with this. But the fact of the matter is, everything was customized because they didn't have it all right yet. It was new. It was the Wild West.
Yeah.
These systems are mature. They do a lot of stuff, and they have been built in a way that allows the vendor and or the developer that has access to the toolkit and or a high-end system administrator to configure things without having to customize. That's the most important thing. So there are switches you can flip that say, I'm a trade association, I'm a professional association, I'm on a fiscal year of June through, May. I'm on a fiscal year that coincides with the calendar year. All those things are presets, kind of like setting up your car.
Yep.
And once those things are preset, it gets you a lot of the way to where you need to be. Now, as I said, there are always some things, a couple of things that come up that are unusual with when you really go into discovery and you dig deep. And you have to make a choice there, because what customization can do to you is it can, in some cases, if it's a good enough customization, it can take you off the upgrade path, and you never want to do that because it right away, whenever anything's special, things get broken more easily. It breaks reports, the upgrade takes longer, so your down the line costs of just upgrading your system can be heavier. It just creates all kinds of problems for you down the line. It can, it can cause downtime if an upgrade breaks, if you lose reports and you don't notice it right away, those kinds of things. So you don't want to customize if you don't have to, in the sense of real, true customizations. Enhancements, maybe, if you can work them in, if you sometimes you can build extensions that an upgrade doesn't touch, an upgrade just kind of passes over, and those seem to work out a little better than actually writing code and changing code. So our advice to clients is always try to adjust your business processes wherever you can to the way the AMS works and not the other way around. And that's part of picking the system that's best for you, so that you can kind of look at, okay, here's how we do things. Is this going to be really alien to the way this system works? And if it is, am I willing to make those changes?
Excellent. Well, Catherine, I think we're a little bit out of time here, but I do want to thank you for the interview and for covering some very helpful bits of information related to the AMS selection process. Thanks to everybody for watching. Be sure to sign up today in the upper right-hand corner of this website to be updated via email when new interviews are posted. Also, be sure to follow @BrianKellyNow on Twitter to stay on top of all things Association Mavens related. Lastly, please submit your recommendation for which Association Maven you'd like to see interviewed next. Thanks again for watching, and I look forward to bringing you some more great interviews. Bye-bye.